Hello and welcome to World Konnect. What a week it has been, full of heartwarming and heartbreaking developments. President Obama bids goodbye in Chicago and President-elect Trump prepares to take the center stage, dodging personal controversies. Taliban creates mayhem in Afghanistan again, while Golden Globe Awards falls in love with the romantic musical La La Land. This is World Konnect, your window to the world. Let's begin with the focus of the show. Obama delivers his farewell speech. Trump admin called Russia and China a major challenge. Show of strength at the Russian border as US-led NATO forces deployed in Poland. Twin bombings killed 38 in Kabul. Taliban takes responsibility. Suicide bombers also hit Kandahar and Helmand province. Trump admin does hard talk on South China Sea. China flexes muscles, but growing ties between the US and Taiwan irks Beijing. Significant dip in asylum seekers in Germany. Resettlement of refugees remains contentious issue as Chancellor Merkel seeks re-election. Yes, we can. Yes, we did. With that emotional appeal, US President Barack Obama concluded his farewell address. Meanwhile, his successor Donald Trump continued to court controversy over the news of Russia's cyber attack and meddling in presidential elections. He promised tough stand with rivals like Russia and China. Thousands of kilometers away, Kremlin was left fuming as US-led NATO forces are deployed in Poland. Trump will officially take on office on January 20th.
I do have one final ask of you as your president. I am asking you to hold fast to that faith written into our founding documents, that idea whispered by slaves and abolitionists, that spirit sung by immigrants and homesteaders and those who marched for justice, that creed reaffirmed by those who planted flags from foreign battlefields to the surface of the moon. A creed at the core of every American whose story is not yet written. Yes, we can. Yes, we did.
In his final trip to Chicago, as President Barack Obama reflected on his legacy and urged Americans to stand up for US values and reject discrimination as the United States transitions to the presidency of Republican Donald Trump. A day after Obama's farewell speech, President-elect Trump held a press conference highlighting a challenging start to his presidency. His plans for better ties with Putin's Russia have come under intense scrutiny after US intelligence agencies concluded that Russia used cyber attacks and other tactics to try to tilt the presidential election in his favor over Democrat Hillary Clinton. Trump acknowledged that Russia likely indulged in cyber attacks but defended his goal for better ties with Moscow. He hoped for a good relationship with Putin but could not guarantee it.
He shouldn't be doing it. He won't be doing it. Russia will have much greater respect for our country when I'm leading it than when other people have led it. You will see that. Russia will respect our country more. There's no reset button. We're either going to get along or we're not. I hope we get along, but if we don't, that's possible too.
Meanwhile, Trump's CIA nominee, Mike Pompeo, has included Russia in list of global challenges. Also, Trump's choice of Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, believes US needs to be ready for both Russia and China.
I would consider the principal threats to start with Russia. I believe that we're going to have to manage that competition between us and China, and I would just say that what we've got to do is engage diplomatically, engage in terms of alliances, engage economically, and maintain a very strong military.
While Trump prepares to re-engineer ties with Russia, US soldiers as part of a NATO build-up were deployed in eastern Poland, a move welcomed by the host country. US and Polish forces will participate in a joint exercise in Poland at the end of January as part of a series of measures aimed at reassuring US allies in Europe after Russia's 2014 annexation of the Crimea region of Ukraine. Russian Foreign Ministry sharply reacted to the deployment, saying that United States is provoking confrontation with what Moscow described as a military build-up in Poland. In United States, Republicans began delivering on their promise to end Obamacare. US House Republicans on Friday won passage of a measure starting the process of dismantling Obamacare, despite concerns about not having a ready replacement and the potential financial cost of repealing President Barack Obama's landmark health insurance law. The House voted 227 to 198 to instruct committees to draft legislation by a target date of January 27. The Senate approved the same measure early Thursday. The resolution passed by the House and the Senate does not need presidential approval since it is part of an internal congressional budget process. No Democrats supported the initiative. Mexico's President Enrique Peña Nieto has rejected Donald Trump's demand that Mexico pay for a wall along the border. But he vowed to seek good relations with the U.S. President-elect Donald Trump. Hours after Trump repeated his warning against Mexico during a press conference, Peña Nieto said his government will seek open and complete negotiations with the next U.S. government. He said any negotiations must include touchy topics for Americans, including putting an end to the flow of illegal guns across the border and arming deadly drug cartels. Ending a long-standing exception to U.S. immigration policy, Obama administration on Thursday repealed a measure granting automatic residency to virtually every Cuban who arrived in the United States, whether or not they had visas. The end of wet foot, dry foot policy, which allowed any Cuban who reached U.S. soil to stay but returned any picked up at sea, is effective immediately. The shift had been in the works for months. It was announced abruptly because advance warning might have inspired thousands of more people to take to the seas between the communist-ruled island and Florida in order to beat a deadline. Cuban and U.S. commerce and economic officials have welcomed the decision by the Obama administration. Nicaraguan President Daniel Ortega was sworn in for a consecutive third time on Tuesday after a convincing electoral win last year. The 70-year-old former guerrilla fighter who ran with his wife Rosario Murillo as vice president had 72.5% of the votes. Ortega's victory comes off the back of a growing economy that has seen poverty in Nicaragua fall almost 13 percentage points under his rule. In the United States, record snow has been pummeling the western parts with freezing temperatures, blocking roads and leaving some areas across the region without power. In Portland, for instance, a commuter train slid off the tracks after heavy snow and sub-zero temperatures left the rails frozen. Separately, in Bend, the roof of a gym at the 70-year-old Kenwood Elementary School collapsed under the weight of the snow. Peace was again short-lived in Afghanistan. Taliban struck in a deadly twin bombing attack, including near the parliament complex in Kabul, that left 38 dead and many more injured. In another bomb explosion in Kandahar, 5 Emirates carrying out humanitarian work and some high-ranking officials were among those killed. Bombers also targeted Helmand province.
It happened during a period of relative calm in Kabul. The capital city of Afghanistan was once again rocked by twin bombings near the parliament on Tuesday, killing more than 30 people and wounding more than 80. Besides, explosion and suicide bombing also hit Kandahar and Helmand province respectively. In Kabul, the first bomb exploded near a parked minibus, while the second one exploded during the evening rush hour as parliament staff were leaving the parliament complex. Most of the victims were parliamentary staff members.
A suicide attacker on foot blew himself up, followed by a car bomb attack in this area, which resulted in the killing and wounding of many people. Most of those killed or wounded are civilians. We are investigating the incidents.
Afghan Taliban movement immediately claimed responsibility for the attack. The group said that its target had been a minibus carrying staff from the National Directorate of Security, that is NDS, Afghanistan's main intelligence agency. While in Kandahar, Emiratis were among the 13 people killed when explosives hidden in a sofa detonated inside the governor's compound in southern Kandahar, while the UAE's ambassador to Afghanistan escaped the attack with injuries. The ambassador was on a humanitarian mission to Kandahar. There have been no initial claims of responsibility for the attack in Kandahar.
Among those killed were Deputy Governor of Kandahar, Abdul Shamsi, Afghan diplomat in Washington, Mr. Amal, as well as some other high-ranking officials.
Elsewhere, in Helmand province, a Taliban suicide bomber targeted a guest house used by an intelligence official, killing at least 7 people, both civilian and military personnel. Afghanistan's President Ashraf Ghani has ordered an investigation. Condemning these attacks, the US Embassy in Kabul said that Afghanistan deserves peace and security, not deliberate and murderous attacks that victimize innocent Afghans who serve their fellow citizens. While condemning the attacks, the United Nations called for the perpetrators to be brought to justice. The violence highlights the precarious security situation in Afghanistan, which has seen a steady increase in attacks since international troops ended combat operations in 2014. Such deplorable acts of violence cause immense human suffering and make peace more difficult to achieve.
Trump's aggressive foreign policy vis-à-vis China was the highlight as his nominee for Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, raked up the South China issue. Beijing wasn't pleased. Meanwhile, China continued to flex muscles, unnerving its neighbors, especially Taiwan. Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen's growing ties to the US has been a cause of concern for the Asian giant lately.
US President-elect Donald Trump's nominee for Secretary of State on Wednesday set the tone for his foreign policy, especially with regard to the South China Sea issue. The nominee for US Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, said that China should not be allowed to access islands that it has built in the South China Sea. At his confirmation hearing before the US Senate Foreign Relations Committee on Wednesday, Tillerson said that China's construction of artificial islands in the contested sea was akin to Russia's taking Crimea from Ukraine in 2014. While responding to Tillerson's comments, China said that it has the right to carry out normal activities in its sovereign territory.
China's island building in the South China Sea is an illegal taking of disputed areas without regard for international norms. China's economic and trade practices have not always followed its commitments to global agreements. It steals our intellectual property and is aggressive and expansionist in the digital realm.
Like the US, the China also completely has the right to conduct any normal activities in its sovereign territory, and that is indisputable.
In another development, China sailed its sole aircraft carrier, Liaoning, through the Taiwan Strait following exercises in the South China Sea. In response, Taiwan scrambled jets and its own ships in the sea. Taiwan's defense ministry said that the aircraft carrier entered its air defense identification zone in the southwest. However, Chinese Vice Foreign Minister said that it was normal for China's ships to enter the strait as it is an international waterway.
The Taiwan Strait is a waterway shared by the mainland and Taiwan, and also an international waterway, so it is normal for Liaoning to go back and forth through the Taiwan Strait in course of training.
The latest Chinese exercises unnerved Beijing's neighbors, especially Taiwan, which Beijing claims as its own. Taiwan's Mainland Affairs Council said on Wednesday that cross-strait ties would not benefit from China's threats. The development comes just days after Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen visited the US en route to Central America, despite protests from Beijing. Earlier, US President-elect Trump had spoken with Tsai, triggering protest from Beijing.
United States has expressed concern over the reports that many bloggers and writers in Pakistan have been going missing in recent weeks. US State Department Deputy Spokesman Mark Toner told reporters at his daily news conference that we are very concerned by reports that several Pakistani bloggers and activists have been reported missing, and we're going to continue to monitor the situation. Earlier, United Nations human rights expert had called on the Pakistani authorities to make it a top priority to locate, protect and return home 4 disappeared human rights and social media campaigners. The 4 men, Waqas Goraya, Asim Saeed, Salman Haidar and Ahmad Raza Nasir, went missing between 4th and 7th January. UNICEF has renewed its call on all parties to the conflict in Yemen and those who have influence over them to protect children and stop the attacks on civilian infrastructure, including schools and education facilities, in accordance with their obligations under the international humanitarian law. Addressing media persons in the capital, Sana'a, the newly appointed UNICEF representative, Magdal Rolano, said that children continue to die from preventable diseases and malnutrition rates are on the rise.
The figures in terms of malnutrition are really shocking. At least 1.7 million have now moderate malnutrition, and 462,000 are severely acute malnourished.
South Korea is in the throes of a bird flu outbreak and for the first time has asked the United States to ship it shell eggs. A sample of imported eggs arrived at the Incheon International Airport on Thursday from the US. This was ahead of the planned first shipment of eggs from the US to ease the country's egg shortage caused by its worst ever bird flu epidemic. The imported US eggs will be distributed to grocery stores and supermarkets ahead of the Lunar New Year holiday season at the end of this month. Owing to the changing political and security landscape in Europe, Germany has recorded a significant drop in number of asylum seekers. While Syrians and other refugees continue to pour in Germany to find a new home, the net drop in asylum seekers may actually be a silver lining for Chancellor Angela Merkel, who is seeking re-election while dealing with the contentious issue of refugee settlement.
Germany has seen a dramatic drop in new asylum seekers, with 6 lakh fewer arriving in the country last year. About 2,80,000 new asylum seekers arrived in the country last year, less than a third of the previous year's huge influx of 890,000. As security and refugee debates heat up in Germany, these figures might give a sense of satisfaction to Chancellor Angela Merkel as she prepares to seek re-election later this year. The fall reflected tougher rules at home and border closures by other countries. Arrivals declined sharply with the closure of Balkan migrant route in March and the subsequent agreement between European Union and Turkey to stem the flow across the Aegean Sea to Greece.
The figure for the year 2016 is 2,80,000 people who sought asylum. This is considerably less than a third of the previous year's figure, and this figure also includes the very high number of arrivals of the first 3 months.
Asylum applications have lagged well behind arrivals, and many people who came to Germany in 2015 applied only last year. Migrants who arrive in Germany are first registered at reception centers, where they have to wait for months before they can file an asylum application, creating a huge backlog and putting strain on civil servants.
The best thing is success. The fact that today we can treat people the way it would be expected from Germany, with a focus on those who need our attention, love and support. This is better organized, but it's also clear that those who deceive us must count on being detected and sanctioned. For me, that's a good feeling.
Syrians remain the largest group of asylum seekers, accounting for 36% of applicants in 2016. Next came Afghans on 17% and Iraqis on 13%. The continued flow of migrants into Europe remains the defining factor, transforming the internal political dynamics in the European Union. In Germany itself, the challenge of resettling and integrating the current immigrant wave has become a key political issue. Chancellor Angela Merkel, who in 2015 declared that there was no limit to Germany's acceptance of migrants, has since changed her position ahead of elections scheduled for this fall. Mrs. Merkel acknowledged that the migrant crisis could have been handled better.
Talks to resolve the decades-old division of Cyprus ended without agreement on Thursday, but with a plan for officials to reconvene on January 18 to tackle the thorny security question before a fresh attempt to forge a political deal. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said that he was confident that the participants were determined to make a last effort to find a solution. There was no precise date set for the guarantors of the process to meet again. Greek, Turkish and British foreign ministers are the guarantors of the process. The East Mediterranean island has been partitioned between the ethnic Turks and Greeks since 1974, when Turkish forces invaded in response to an Athens-inspired coup aimed at the union with Greece. Belgian authorities have charged 2 people with supplying fake documents to an Islamic State militant involved in the November 2015 attacks in Paris and who later carried out a suicide bombing on the Brussels metro. The prosecutor said on Thursday that Khaled El Bakroi was involved in planning the attacks in Paris on the evening of November 13, 2015, in which 130 people were killed. He then blew himself up in the Brussels metro last March as part of coordinated attacks that killed 32 people. Belgian police detained a man and a woman in a house search on Wednesday. Special Bolivian forces on Tuesday set fire to 3 fields of marijuana, or the equivalent of 14 tons, in the municipality of Mizik. According to Bolivia's special narco-trafficking forces, the drugs were brought together and around the region and cumulatively made up roughly 2 hectares of land. It's the first time authorities found a field of marijuana of this size for this region. That brings us to the end of this edition of World Konnect. Do send us your feedback. Our email ID is worldkonnect.ddnews@gmail.com. But before we end the show, we leave you with the glitzy spectacle from Australian town of Parkes, where thousands took to the streets to honor entertainer Elvis Presley in the town's 25th annual street parade. Enjoy the visuals. Goodbye.